Dear viewers, welcome to another segment of Classical Greek Values and Modern Realities, sponsored by the Aristotle and Alexander Press. Today's topic is Greek architecture, Pericles and the Parthenon. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome again Harrison Shepherd.
Thank you, Dimitri. The great Greek statesman of the 5th century BC, Pericles, is most famous for two things: his funeral oration, as recorded by Thucydides, celebrating the democracy of Athens and the way in which Athens was the school of Hellas, and secondly, the fact that he arranged and managed the construction of the Parthenon. I had seen many photographs of the Parthenon before my first visit to Greece in 1978. But no photograph of the Parthenon, no matter how skillful, can recreate exactly the impact of a view of the Parthenon itself. I arrived in Athens late at night and went to a hotel which, unknown to me, had a magnificent view of the Parthenon from its dining room at the top of the building. In the morning, when I went to breakfast and looked out through the windows and saw the Parthenon standing there on the Acropolis, I was awed by the wonder and the majesty of its beauty, still standing after nearly 2,500 years. My subjective reaction, though, is not just the reaction of an enthusiastic Philhellene. It is the reaction of those who really understand architecture. Ralph Lieberman, a professor of architecture at Williams College and a scholar of architecture at Williams College in New York, has written, "No building in the history of Western architecture has maintained so firm a grip on the imagination as has the Parthenon for nearly 2.5 millennia. It was in the Parthenon that the Greek vision of the beautiful received its most complete architectural expression, and there has never been another building with its peculiar power to move us. But what has made the building a cultural icon is what it represents." What it represents can best be understood, I think, by understanding the history of the Parthenon. The Greeks had had a war with the Persians and formed a league called the Delian League, a group of allies to combat the Persians, against whom they were eventually victorious. The Persians had sacked and destroyed another temple to Athena on the Acropolis, and after the Persian Wars, Pericles used the funds from the Delian League to reconstruct the Parthenon. Its architects were men named Ictinus and Callicrates, and the sculptor, the man who sculpted the magnificent statue of Athena, which stood inside the Parthenon, which is a temple of Athena, is Phidias, the most well-known name among ancient sculptures. The building was begun in 447 BC and completed 15 years later. It represented not only the height of classical beauty, but also a proof of the power that Athens had obtained among the Delian League. It was probably the greatest public work in all history, and conceived by Pericles as the building that would be seen throughout Athens, standing on the Acropolis for all time. He certainly made, by the magnificent construction of the Parthenon, Athens a city even more fit for living, with a view of the supremely beautiful at its peak. But the Parthenon was more than just an expression of Athenian power. It was also, as Dr. Lieberman's statement suggests, an expression of many of the classical Greek values with which this program is concerned. Various of the friezes around the Parthenon and on the metopes, for example, show what some of those values are. The sculptures on the metopes, which are a section at the corners of the building, each show something about the difference between and the conflict between the beautiful and chaos, the orderly and just, and the disorderly and evil. We can learn a great deal from what Pericles and the Athenians' motivations were in building the Parthenon. Its direct architectural influence, of course, we can see to the present day that the values, the aesthetic values, illuminated so beautifully in the Parthenon are reflected in buildings that have been built ever since then and up to the present time. We can survey buildings throughout San Francisco and see many of them, even including our City Hall here in San Francisco, that reflect some elements that you can see in the Doric beauty of the Parthenon. If we had a Pericles today, it would not be so much that we would necessarily need the kind of expressions of power and empire that the Parthenon expressed politically. If we were going to have a statesman with architectural sense expressing the values that we most need now, it would probably be someone who understood the principles of green architecture, which we discuss in our book, Too Much for Our Own Good. That would be an expression of the values embodied in the Parthenon in a different way, because the Parthenon expressed an elegance and an economy of architectural style which we need now in a new form when we talk about economy. One of the problems of the 21st century is the waste with which we have been building many of our public structures. Green architecture is at least a way of respecting the environment and constructing things with economy and elegance, which in a different way reflects that ancient Greek value. We still have a lot to learn from classical Greek values, and their aesthetic embodiment and their embodiment of the economy of beauty is above all visible in the Parthenon.
All the time in modern days. Yet we still see the influence of the ancient Greek style perfected in the Parthenon. Why do you think this is so?
Essentially, it's so because of the enduring beauty of the Parthenon and ancient Greek architecture, classical architecture at its best. I can best answer that question by two quotations. Plutarch, writing 5 centuries after the Parthenon was built, in his Life of Pericles says, "The works of Pericles are all the more to be wondered at, as they were created in a short time for all time. Its beauty was even then and at once antique, but in the freshness of its vigor it is, even to the present day," he's talking about 100 AD, "recent and newly wrought. Such is the bloom of perpetual newness, as it were, upon this work of his, which makes it ever to look untouched by time, as though the unfaltering breath of an ageless spirit had been infused into them." The reason that we still are influenced by classical Greek architecture is the way that it does embody the agelessness of true beauty and form. If I may conclude my answer with a poem to the Parthenon that expresses, I think, the most direct response to your question. The Parthenon's porch of stone, its peak once storied set, majestic forms Acropolis in music still, and yet, with columns laid to lure the eye and lines unearthly pure, to awe each traveler passing through its high Hellenic door. If eternity were marbled and set upon the ground, to show how thoughtless time decays, in it would like be found an echo of the Parthenon's beauteous building unsurpassed, in frozen music God's inspired, whichever timeless lasts. When men shall ask if God still lives and thus confess their doubt, bring them to the Parthenon where this melody sings out. Though men are mortal creatures, carved of fragile flesh and blood, their art sublime has shaped the truth and manifested God. We continue to build on the classical Greek ideal in architecture because it is a timeless beauty preserved, as architects have said, in frozen music of the spirit.
A wonderful poem, Harrison. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, next week we're going to talk about the athletics in ancient and modern times, and we're going to talk about the Olympics. This series is sponsored by the Aristotle and Alexander Press. Have a nice week.